Excellent. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for putting this together. This has been a great morning so far, and I know that I'm one of the few things that's keeping you all for your lunches. So hopefully this will keep you entertained and contribute something as well. I'm the Natural Resources Program Manager at Washington State Parks, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit about how it is that we in the Washington State Park System are trying to manage for invasive species, climate change, and the nexus of those two things. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Washington State Park System, we have over 138,000 acres that we are managing in 138 developed parks. We actually have quite a few other acres that are contained in some undeveloped parks properties that we're also managing for. And one of the things that I really wanted to point out with this map is you can see that the vast majority of our parks are pretty small and that they are generally located in low to mid elevations. And so that means that in addition to the general impacts of climate change and invasive species, they're also experiencing a lot of pressure from the fact that they are small, they're fragmented, and they're in a landscape that, in addition to receiving the recreational pressure from the visitors that we welcome into our parks, they're experiencing pressures from urbanization and agricultural development around them. So it's kind of a continuous pressure cooker on our parks that's impacting management. A lot of people are familiar with the great recreational opportunities that our parks provide. And these are just a few of our most popular parks throughout the system. Deception Pass State Park, which is our most popular park, receives over 3 million visitors per year. And I know within the last couple of years, those numbers have actually been higher than that. So they're great parks. And like I said, people are really familiar with kind of these more recreational opportunities. And I think what a lot of people aren't as familiar with are the superlatives that Washington State Parks has as far as the natural resources that we manage. More than 10% of our ecosystems provide habitat for rare plants or animals, including some that either occur solely within our park system within the US or have the majority of the remaining habitat within our park system. More than 40% support ecosystems that are at moderate to severe risk of extirpation at the state or global level. And almost all remaining low elevation old growth forests in Washington are within Washington State Parks. And this includes several occurrences of rare plant communities, rare forest types that are only known to occur in Washington State Parks. And again, this is because we are managing for these low to mid elevation natural areas that are really there for, the most active uses for recreation. But, while all of these really rare ecosystems and species are really important and for us to manage and to maintain, an additional, I think, really important mission for us in managing natural resources is that we play an important role in keeping the common. And this is something that can really be a challenge because they don't receive nearly as much attention or resources. So when we start to think about how we manage for the natural resources and for the entire rest of our state parks resources, all of our facilities and our historical structures, in light of climate change, I can say that we have prepared both a climate change vulnerability assessment that was completed in 2017 that again looked throughout all of the different kinds of resources that our state park system manages and throughout the state, and looked at how vulnerable they are to the impacts of climate change, and then developed an adaptation plan that we released in 2019 that really starts to get at how is it that we're going to address these different vulnerabilities in the system. This is really meant to be a living document, and so I think you might be able to see a little bit of the watermark there for draft, but that's indicating that these are going to be continuing to evolve and change over time. but looking at things like how is it that we're going to manage for invasive species within our forested ecosystems. And one of the really important things that we really realized through this process, and this is similar and kind of echoes some of the messages that we heard earlier, is that managing for invasive species in light of climate change within our park system in many ways isn't that much different than how it is that we intend to manage for invasive species, not in light of climate change, but it really, I think, puts an emphasis on the fact that we really need to be mindful of invasive species, putting an emphasis on collecting the data, the early detection, involving all of our staff in addressing issues of invasive species, and really trying to mainstream invasive species control in our daily operations. And what this has generally fallen into are really kind of three different buckets of restoration activities. So addressing the regulated weeds, so Class A and Class B weeds within our parks. And, you know, state parks and all the agencies I know were hit pretty hard when the recession hit in the late 2000s. And for a long time, this is really kind of what we were limited to doing, is really just addressing the weeds that we were required to address. Luckily, we've been able to build back up our stewardship efforts within the park system. And especially within the last several years, there's been an increasing emphasis on forest health. For us at Washington State Parks, forest health spans from our east side forest to the west side forest, and not including just treatments on individual trees, but also addressing issues like invasive species within forested ecosystems if they're degrading the health of that system. And then also restoration of high priority areas. This is actually an example of a project that kind of ticks all three of those boxes. We are controlling spurge laurel, which is a regulated weed in Skagit County, where Hope Island is located. Hope Island, Skagit. We actually have two Hope Islands at state parks. But in addition to that, we have a few different rare forest types that occur on this island. And it is a high priority because of both those rare forest types and some rare and high quality grassland bog communities that are at this site. Now, while that really talks specifically just about invasive species, where I really think that the nexus of invasive species and climate change comes in is thinking about, as was again mentioned earlier in the panel, that what we really need to be doing is increasing the resilience of our ecosystems to all the perturbations that they're experiencing. We have been conducting vegetation surveys that have included an assessment of ecological condition in our different parks for a number of years. And through that, we have found that about 30% of our areas are in an A to B range, so excellent to good ecological condition. About 30% are in a fair condition, the B to C. And then unfortunately, about 40% of them are less than that. They're in fairly poor condition. And what we have decided is that we're going to set a target that we're going to move all of those areas that are within that B to C range, within that fair condition, into at least a B quality, so into the good to excellent condition. It's not that we're entirely giving up on the areas that are in that poor condition, but many of them are areas that also receive high levels of recreational pressure, and so really just aren't a priority for us investing natural resources dollars. We're going to be managing them for different reasons. And the exception really being where we do have high quality, rare community types that have just become more degraded. And what we're using for a tool in order to do this is ecological integrity assessments, as have been developed by NatureServe and the Natural Heritage programs. What the EIA methodology does is it uses reference communities in order to determine what the structure, composition, function, and a connectivity of an ecosystem should be. And you're using that as kind of the metric for how it is that your ecosystem currently is and where it should be going in the future. So this is an example of an excellent integrity ecosystem. You can see that with some increased perturbation, in this case, invasive species and probably climate change, maybe historic grazing, we've had a somewhat degraded ecosystem. It gets further degraded with an increase in your annual species. And then at some point, that system reaches a tipping point and becomes a new type of ecosystem. And what I see coming into play is, as we start to manage things, we are looking at those reference ecosystems and thinking about we're trying to move those move our current ecosystems into that B to A range. And as we start to address some of these other communities that have reached this tipping point, really assessing, is it that they are undergoing succession, which is fine within this framework, thinking about succession, that's part of that natural variability that we are trying to manage for and that we're trying to enable. Or is it that they've reached a tipping point because of invasive species? And it's something that we need to think about, what is the different kind of ecosystem that we can move them towards that's maybe more native? And potentially offers opportunity for thinking about bringing in new species from other areas if we want to start thinking about assisted migration. But that's very different than restoration of an ecosystem that's already still maintains quite a bit of a native component to it. So I was asked a little bit about asked to think a bit about what my unknowns or concerns are and what keeps me up at night. And while this may not seem like that scary of a creature, for me, managing a lot of areas that are within the San Juan Islands, it really is. And not just deer, but some of our other native species that are really, what are increaser species that they might be native to the system, but are increasing because of either the changes that we're seeing or a lack of some historical pressures. We don't have predators in the areas that are keeping deer populations down. And that's really impacting our ability to manage for resilience in these ecosystems because of their impacts. Interestingly enough, deer populations in Washington crashed pretty hard this year in the San Juan Islands because of a virus that some have speculated might have become more virulent because of climate change. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that in the future. I also worry about shifting baselines, about the fact that, this used to be the norm and now you don't see fish this big anymore. Similarly, when we look at ecosystems now, our lens as to what is normal is different than what it might have been 15, 20 years ago. Or more longer. And while some of that might be, might be necessary to think about changing our goals, I worry about us kind of losing touch with kind of that historical perspective. Increasing threats from disturbances and more frequent disturbances. This is 25 Mile Creek. This park burned pretty much and completely this year. It was the third time that it's burned within the last 10 years. And this is a system where I'm looking at it's potentially gone across that threshold. And I don't know what it should look like in the future. And so these are the kinds of things that it's certainly an unknown that's going to challenge our restoration and management abilities. And then finally, as one of the last slides and last talk mentioned, funder fatigue, the fact that agencies don't really think long-term about funding actions, and people like to see results in a couple of years, and management for these resources is really not a short-term thing. So finally, and I'm sure I'm probably out of time, so I'll just put this up here without saying too much, but Ivan had mentioned at the start of his comment that there's a gap between researchers, those in research institutions, and funders, and those who are actually on the ground in management. And I've had a foot in two of those three different worlds, and I can say that there definitely is a gap, even in applied ecology in the research realm. It's very different than applied ecology in the actual applied realm, and that's not pointing fingers at anyone. I see it as an opportunity. I would love to have more partnerships with people who want to conduct research. There are a lot of opportunities with what we're doing on the ground that I think are really exciting and really interesting. and and you can really do some really good, meaningful restoration work, while also learning something that potentially can be applied more broadly. So thank you very much for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. And if you have any interest in any of what we're doing, including partnering, I'd be happy to hear from you. Thanks very much.